Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Marlon Moore, president of Marlon Moore Consulting, and I'm pleased to announce my first ever podcast for a new series called More DEI Conversations. And these discussions, that's what they are, really designed to facilitate one-on-one conversations with individuals who've had an impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm extremely excited today to be joined by my good friend, Phil Andrews, who's the Chief Executive Officer for USA Weightlifting. And just to share a little bit about Phil's background, Phil was appointed CEO of USA Weightlifting in April 2016 and is responsible for overseeing the strategy and operations of the organization. During his tenure at USA Weightlifting, Phil has helped to transform the sport. The sport has had a resurgence in the United States and completely changed the culture within the sport in the US and abroad with significant membership growth. Phil has also restructured the operations and governance of USA Weightlifting, supported significant reform internationally, especially in the area of anti-doping, hosted 3 International Weightlifting Federation World Championships events, created the first independent ethics and judicial process, and has overseen high performance turnaround since some of the best results that they've experienced in over 60 years. So Phil has been extremely busy. And then at one point, he also served as the interim director general of the International World Federation. And I hope I got that right, Phil. And he's just
International Weightlifting Federation. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And Phil has just been a very, very strong advocate of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially for BIPOC, which are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so, Phil, thank you so much for joining me today with at More D&I Conversations. Look forward to sharing this time with you. And with that, let's just jump into the conversation.
Sounds good to me, and thanks for having me. And those are very kind words, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Well deserved. Very much well deserved. So, Phil, one of the things that, I often talk about with my clients is intrinsic motivation. What drives you to move the needle in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why is it important? So let me pose that question to you directly, straight off the top.
I think there's a few reasons. It's a few reasons why it's important. I think the clue's in the name, inclusion. When you're looking to bring together a community, which is one of the things we do with national governing bodies and one of the things we do with sports, when you're looking to grow a community, then the word inclusion just makes sense to get behind any initiative that looks like it might drive more inclusion. Number two, I think for me, I came from a for want of better terminology, a disadvantaged background. Let's be honest, I'm a middle-aged white man. So I have all of the privileges offered by my accident of birth, but I did grow up in an underprivileged neighborhood, for want of better terminology, in Great Britain, as the voice might suggest. And I think that gives me a motivation to see that others get opportunities that their accident of birth may not afford them. And they do that in a fair, reasonable, equal way. And ultimately everybody feels welcome. And I think that's nobody is asking for anything that they don't otherwise deserve. How about that? And and that's where DEI for me is really should be very high up the agenda, especially where you have a membership situation or a sports situation where it's a community. In the corporate world, it comes down to, do you want your employees to be happy? And if you do, does that include all of them? And if it does, they should be important. And that extends. It's not just to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That extends through to military veterans who've had a different experience. It especially extends to the LGBTQ community. And quite frankly, there's many disadvantages that come in that particular space, and that's obviously a hot topic in sport at the moment, across a number of those areas, and it extends through to all of the areas of DI disability as well, of course, and it's important to look at all of those different facets, and again, inclusion for me is the key word. That's not to say that diversity and equity aren't important, they are. But inclusion, I think, is the key word there. Of we want everybody to be included, we want everybody to have an opportunity, we want that to be fair and equal, and ultimately, we want to extend, in our case, the love of the barbell, the love of weightlifting, to every community in America. And the only way to do that is by widening the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Phil. And I really appreciate you mentioning the other dimensions of diversity as well: sexual orientation, military status, gender, and the such. But let's have a real conversation here, Phil. Your sport has traditionally lacked representation from BIPOC communities or other communities.
Yeah.
So how is USA Weightlifting working to improve representation in your sports?
So we've had a history of phenomenal African American athletes: Oscar Chaplin, Kendrick Farris, way back to John Davis. You know, John Davis was a multiple-time world champion, Olympic champion, world record holder, in a time where it was challenging to live as an African American. I mean, it's not challenging today, but when it was a time when living in as an African American man was unimaginable, even compared to what it is today. And you know, he would go and compete in the South, and you know, he had to be put through that in order for him to be an Olympian. He was not the first African American Olympian, but he was one of the first. And he's certainly one of our heroes. We're actually talking in Black History Month, and we've just celebrated him and a number of our other legends who have been come from the African American community. But what we've not seen as much is those athletes, first of all, in sheer number. A number of our very elite athletes have been African American, both men and women. Our women's side is growing significantly. That's not what we're talking about this very second, but is now over 50% just of our athlete population. But that historically has not been the case. The journey has not happened between a large amount of grassroots athletes going to elite. We've seen elite athletes, the amount of the grassroots level isn't quite as broad as it should be historically. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is you're not seeing people transition from, I love this sport, I love picking up a barbell, or I'm a great athlete like a John Davis or a Kendrick Farris or so forth. And they're not transitioning into coaching. And they're not transitioning from coaching then into administration or into governance or leadership roles. And there's a few reasons for that. I think, you know, one of the reasons is, am I wanted? And you know, one of the things is very simply asking people to do so, asking people to run, asking people to become coaches. There's I think a sense of, will I be accepted? Will I be able to run a gym? People want to be coached by me. You know, I've heard that from some of our African American individuals who are both men and women, but particularly women, I have to say, going forward to looking to get into coaching. And those are challenges that are difficult to overcome. Of course, we can put in some processes and some scholarships and what have you to help that. And we are seeing it grow. But I think that's one of the inherent problems. Our HBCU program particularly targets the administration side, where we're bringing in students from HBCUs into the Olympic movement to essentially, one bit of terminology, intern directly with us and build up those networks and opportunities within, most of us are based in Colorado Springs, within Colorado, and then hopefully those result in later employment opportunities or indeed governance opportunities. And they come in, they spend time at our events, they spend time in the office, they spend time with our employees, they spend time with our governance leaders. We also have put in some regulation around this, where we must have diversity now within our committees and our board. And that's the other thing. If you're going to see somebody run for the board of directors, the leadership of the organization, they've got to be here on the committees too. And same thing applies on staff. African-American CEO, there's one in the Olympic movement, to my knowledge. Maybe I've missed one, but Max Siegel at USA Track and Field is the one and only African-American male CEO that I can think of just this second. But they've got to see that in the C-suite, in the senior directors and the directors, and they've got to see those people up and down the organization. And that's part of it. If you can see it, you can be it, is something that I've heard a lot when I've been exploring this subject. And I really believe that's true. Because again, you see elite athletes following elite athletes, but you don't see them go into coaching. Why? They don't see an example. And I had a really good conversation with an African-American female coach who happens to be an Olympian. And I separate those two because she's a very good coach, and B, by the way, also an Olympian. Those two are separate, because a lot of people say, well, she got there partly because she's an Olympian. I'm like, no, she does happen to be an Olympian, and that's fantastic. She's also a really good coach, separate things. But because it's important to encourage people who didn't quite make the Olympic Games to become coaches. Otherwise, you're not going to have that level and number of people you need to drive that diversity and then get up into the administration side. With Kara, it was interesting because, she and I had a pretty in-depth conversation about this. And she said exactly this of, it was, well, I was encouraged by, Michael Cohen, who was my coach. I was encouraged by Carl Pierce, who was my coach. But then when I saw Ursula coaching, that's when I knew I wanted to be that. That's when I knew I could do it. And Ursula is an Hispanic woman. She's not an African-American woman, but she still saw a powerful woman coaching, doing what she loves, enjoying it, and being respected doing it. And that was really key for Kara. And Kara has now become one of our absolute best and most elite coaches in this country, and rightly so.
Yeah.
I'll stop there because I could talk about this for a long, long time. I'm happy to take follow-up questions, but those are a few of the things that I observed.
Yeah, so that's interesting, Phil, that you bring that up, because kind of translating that, switching sports for a second, the National Football League, football here in the U.S., has had a lot of conversation about African American or Black coaches and leadership. So I love the way you all are thinking about it, because if 70% of the players are Black, and then as you go into head coaches, assistant coaches, GMs, and then ownership, those numbers drop significantly. And so there has to be this pipeline or this, entry into coaching, GM, general manager roles, VP of personnel roles. And I love the way that you all are approaching that from a USA weightlifting perspective. Something I noticed on your plan really quick, Phil, that, and you may have kind of touched on it, but you may want to elaborate a little bit more. You all actually have a goal to increase BIPOC coaches and officials by 2024. Now, it's one thing to sit on here in more D&I conversations and talk about the benefits of it and why skill truly trumps status. But you all actually are saying, no, we're going to make change by holding people accountable and setting goals. Why is that important?
Well, for all the same reasons. It's, again, I'm saying we'd like to increase our BIPOC coaches by a percentage. I am not saying we want to decrease our white coaches or our Asian American coaches or Hispanic coaches. I'm simply saying we want more African American coaches. In an organization which is based around coaches and athletes, and coaches drive athletes, exactly what is the disadvantage of doing that? And I think that's where we actually adjusted. I haven't done our strategic plan in 2020. We actually put the word inclusion deliberately into our mission statement as an organization. This therefore aligns with that. Then the strategic plan aligns with that, because we're growing the sport. The anyone, anywhere concept aligns with that. The inclusion concept aligns with that. And then we have that in our operating goals too. And that is, it's holding us accountable. It's holding our board accountable. It's holding our Diversity and Inclusion Commission accountable. It's holding me as a CEO accountable. And it's holding our Director of Outreach and Programs, Susie Sanchez, who is unbelievable and an asset to our organization, second to none, who really does a lot of our work in D&I space. And Susie, ultimately has this as a goal that mainly sits with her. And I'm pleased to say we set a goal last year to increase our BIPOC coaches by a significant percentage, and we made that goal.
Mm.
Which we're in a pandemic and still made that goal. Now, of course, our numbers are low, so but when you increase by a percentage, you still need to continue to increase that. That's not to say we're done. That's not to say that the work's complete. It's to say we've got room to grow. We've got things to learn too. But you're exactly right. We're putting our accountability and our KPIs, our key performance indicators as an organization, exactly behind these concepts. But another way of looking at it is, if you can't do this for the right, I have this saying, if you can't do it for the right reason, do it for the wrong reason. If we have more coaches and we have more athlete members brought to us by those coaches, we gain more members, which means we gain more revenue to put behind our national teams. So if you can't do it for the right reasons, which is all the things we talked about already, do it for the wrong ones. Here's your business case.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's an opportunity to really leverage the business case, especially when you're talking to your board. You have to be able to articulate why this is good for the sport from a cultural perspective, but then also for the bottom line perspective. And I think you all make a strong case for that. So let me ask you real quick, Phil, was this a hard sell to your board? I know they're pretty engaged, but sometimes the board doesn't really provide oversight or thoughts into this type of work. So what has helped you really bring your board along in this space?
So, I've been fortunate in a lot of ways. The chair who hired me on a permanent basis and then was our chair for a long time, Ursula Garza Papandrea, was an Hispanic woman, still is an Hispanic woman, was our chair. That helps because she's had to fight prejudice. She's had to fight her way to be respected in the sport. The woman had to go to the World Championships 5 times, then be the only woman to coach a men's team to a national championship. She was the only woman to be a senior international coach in her organization. She understands how to fight. And I was really fortunate, I think, to have Ursula in that position when talking about DEI as something we really wanted to get behind. Ursula went on later to chair the IWF Women's Commission worldwide. Before we started recording, I talked about an experience of hers in the Islamic Republic of Iran that she was impactful in. I'm fortunate today that the first chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Commission, or committee at that time, that we created, Sally Vanderwater, was also elected to our board. Our chair after Ursula was also an Hispanic woman, again, passionate about the subject, and I think was able to lead the board through that way of thinking. But the board as a whole, not just Ursula, not just Paula, have been, not just Sally, have been tremendously supportive of this area. It's almost a question I can't answer because it hasn't been a hard sell for us. Our first major activity was Pride. We were the first NGB to change our logo for Pride back in 2017. And there was some very limited opposition on our board about that, about changing the logo and about doing activity for Pride Month. I was assisted by a grand majority of the board who really got behind that. We did have some opposition within our membership. And ultimately the membership, the board is accountable to our general membership. So there were some issues to cover there, but we stood firm and said, no, we are standing up for being an inclusive organization. And we are standing up for what we believe is something that will net, for want of better terminology, bring us more people into weightlifting, drive more acceptance in our gyms, drive more welcoming atmospheres for those who really wish to love the barbell. And that was it. And that's really the core interest of our board, is the barbell. And ultimately what this whole subject centers around is, in our case, weightlifting, is the love of the barbell and weights. And where we want to get to is a conversation or a world or a situation, I think that's perhaps the right word, where weightlifting is seen and understood as a place where anybody's welcome, so long as you love the barbell. That's the only thing, that's the only caveat you got to have. Got to love the barbell.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, Phil, and thank you for leading with your voice and really helping to ensure that the board understands, which it sounds like they're really supportive,
Right.
but understand why DEI truly matters. You use the acronym NGB just so our viewers
I'm sorry.
understand National Governing Body. Want to just provide
Yeah.
a quick overview of that? And
So most people understand there's the US Olympic team, which is governed by a group called the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, or better known as Team USA. Underneath that, there are 56 independent organizations which are called national governing bodies. So your favorite sport probably has one. If it's in the Olympic or Paralympic Games, it has one. So some sports are only in the Paralympic Games, some sports are only in the Pan American Games, some sports are only in the Olympic Games, and then there's winter and summer. Hence, you get to 56 between all of those, big and small. Um, that ranges from USA Gymnastics, US Soccer, US Tennis Association, which of course owns the US Open at the very highest and largest end, down to very small national governing bodies such as Team Handball, USA Badminton, are rather small, who have a fairly niche sport in this country. We sit in the sort of mid range of that. In terms of the number of participants that we have in the sport of weightlifting, we've grown a lot, but that's roughly where we sit. And then above the USOPC, there's the International Olympic Committee, which governs the world for Olympic sport. And then each sport will also have its own international body, which governs how that sport runs. So ours is the International Weightlifting Federation. A lot of people have heard of FIFA, which governs soccer, for example.
Gotcha. Well, appreciate you for that overview. You mentioned Susie Sanchez. I've had the fortunate pleasure of working with her. I think one of the best decisions that organizations can make is to invest human capital in driving this work forward. So you move from just a commitment statement, you have a plan, and then you have someone who can accelerate your plan. And it sounds as if well, no, it doesn't sound, it is Susie Sanchez
It
for
is.
USA Weightlifting. So what made you make that decision to sort of invest in her?
So, Susie, here's where I slightly will differ from you, Marlon. My philosophy is DEI is everyone's responsibility,
That's
as
right.
is anti-doping and athlete safety, especially in a relatively small organization where you can't necessarily afford to have somebody dedicated full-time to the subject. Um, the reason Susie captains that ship for us is that Susie was honestly passionate, worked to
Mhm.
people's passions, worked to people's interests, and they will work harder based upon their passion and interest, and we will reward them for that, is our philosophy. A lot of the DEI work that we started with me. I brought together what became the best practices working group in the Olympic movement, together with colleagues at USA Swimming, USA Cycling. I was behind the initial Pride campaign and a number of other initiatives. But Susie became very passionate about the subject and became very engaged in DEI. And it just made sense to, you know, let the person who is really doing already very passionate, getting very active in the office about it, getting very active with her department in it, engaging very much in conversations around DEI. She wanted to do it. Let's invest in her, give her the appropriate responsibilities, titles, and of course remuneration, and let her do her thing. And
That's right.
my word, she's amazing. I mean, we brought her on. Susie is just an amazing all-round human being. But we brought her on. She's a former weightlifter, University World Championship level athlete for Team USA. She's originally from South Texas. She worked actually on the Super Bowl, but also the IWF World Championships down there. Susie is somebody we brought in to primarily captain our outreach and recruitment team, bringing more people
Mm.
into the sport. Which, how does that fit? Really well. And then we included culture into her job title, and that fits as well here. She now looks after Marcom, so she's actually ended up with the collection of items that really surround where DEI shows up most in what you have to do as your activity in an organization. I don't favor having a specific diversity, equity, and inclusion employee, which I know people disagree with that view. um, quite legitimately. I think one view is having one person responsible for it makes it happen. I think when you have an option like Susie, where you can include being the expert in the organization into somebody who is already there, already understands the culture, already, in Susie's case, lives and breathes the culture that we want to see in USA Weightlifting and is already respected by everybody else, is such a huge win. Because if you have somebody whose responsibility it is in an organization, the downside is it's easy to say, yeah, that's Marlon's responsibility or that's Phil's responsibility. No, no, it's yours and theirs.
That's right.
Um, and I think that's the biggest thing. It's the same reason we don't necessarily have an athlete safety or a safe sport manager. It's the same reason we don't have an anti-doping manager. Is those are the three items that I expect everybody, from our finance director to our membership assistant who answers, the incoming inquiries we have, to really think about those three subjects in anything that we do. And Susie's way there is supporting them in that thought process.
Phil, listen, you just said something that resonates with me totally. As a former chief diversity officer, the words that I love to come out of our chief executive officer's mouth the most is that diversity, equity, inclusion, DE&I, it's everyone's responsibility. It's shared accountability for advancing our efforts. I just
Yeah,
happen to be the person who came in every day to make sure we stayed on track and we executed against our KPIs and strategic objectives. But to truly be impactful, it has to be owned by the board. It has to be owned by you as the
correct,
CEO, and it
correct.
has to be owned by everybody. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Phil. So as we round starting to head home, I want to lighten it up a little bit before I get to my final two questions. So recently had rotator cuff surgery. This wasn't on the list, Phil. So I'm throwing a curveball at you.
You're totally
Recently
good.
tore my shoulder. Want to get back into lifting light weights at some point. Will never. Well, first of all, I was never a heavy lifter, but I want to do something again. What advice would you give me, Phil, as it relates to easing back into lifting weights?
So the funny thing is, I have a shoulder tear right now. It's I'm
So
hoping to
you
avoid
understand my
surgery.
pain.
Well, I hear you. So I'm building a really strong left side right now. So the first is honestly get yourself a really good doctor, and particularly a doctor of physical therapy who understands strength and weightlifting. I think you live in the Cleveland area. I can certainly provide you some contacts up that way. But the biggest thing is to find somebody who understands the body's capabilities, about strength sports, is perhaps certified by someone like USA Weightlifting, let's say, of course. But it's the my prescription from my PT, for example, is a lot of extensions, a lot of rows, so a lot of strength work, um, and very high reps, low weight, to get back to full strength before you can start getting onto the higher weights, and then indeed to overhead work. Unfortunately, shoulders are, once they heal, they're great. We've seen a couple of elite athletes with shoulder issues come in, and what happens is they really can't go overhead for a while
Mm,
after the surgery, but what they can do is squat.
mm.
And so they got real strong in the squat by being able to train that, and and it was amazing to see that strength increase that they had, and that really helped them rest up the rest of their body. And I am no elite athlete by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm working on my strength, doing exactly what my PT told me, and being a good boy with it. But it's my recommendation: get yourself a really good PT who understands physical movement, who understands sports medicine, particularly around strength. And that's your place to start.
Yeah, I appreciate
It's
that. Now,
one.
unfortunately, that's what I was going to say. I don't know if I expected you to add more to my plate, but I guess I work on lower body and do some squats. Hey,
So
let's bring
here's
it.
the thing: we've talked about how diversity, equity, inclusion is everyone's responsibility. So's fitness. So I'm just helping
That's right. That's right. I
you.
appreciate you, my friend. Hey, so one of the things that I think are barriers for diverse communities to getting in different sports is exposure, right?
Agreed.
So if someone is a part of an underrepresented group in your sport and they wanted to get involved in weightlifting, what should they do? How should they go about it?
So we have a number of different ways to get involved, and depending on, frankly, the situation someone's facing would depend on my answer. The shortest answer is go to usaweightlifting.org, go to find a club, get involved that way. However, there's hardship funds available, there's scholarships available to get involved in the coaching side, which some people will use as adults to get involved on the athlete side because they go through the hands-on certification. Um, there are ways to get involved in every state in the nation, locally, statewide, nationally. It all depends on what you want to do and what your situation of hardship you're facing is. We've tried to solve as many as possible, but here's the thing. If you want to lift a weight and you can't find a way to do it, reach out to us and we're going to help you. And we even provide free programs on our social media, which again, Susie Sanchez, which is designed exactly for people to be able to start right in their house if they need to, so they can start getting involved, start lifting weights, start being active within the sport of weightlifting.
So with that, Phil, how can people reach you? You said reach out to you all. I know you have a website, USA Weightlifting,
Yep.
but what's the best way for folks to reach out and find out how to stay involved?
So USA Weightlifting, right, usaweightlifting.org is the website that'll give you a raft of information. Our email, usaw@usaweightlifting.org, that'll reach us. My colleagues Alex Love and Avery Malzoff will get back to you there. I check it too, so does Susie. We will have access to their general box, but it's probably me them who get back to you. And we're easy to reach. Be on Instagram, USA_weightlifting. If that's easier for you, great. DM us there, and you're going to get probably Susie Sanchez. So, given my content of my conversation, maybe DM us on Instagram. So and you'll get right to Susie. So it's again, Facebook, you can reach out to us there too. Whatever's the easiest place for you, wherever you hang out, we'll hang out.
Okay, cool. I love that. Wherever we hang out, you'll hang out. That's very powerful. One last question. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask this. In the news recently, there was an update about pay equity for women's soccer.
Yep.
I know it's not weightlifting, but with your connection to the USA teams and to just ensuring gender parity in your sport and others, any thoughts about what that announcement?
Yeah, so obviously we're not US soccer. I've not been personally involved in any of the conversations that pertain to this particular case. I think the obvious item is good. Thank you. We have equalized the pay for our champion US women's national team. It has taken arguably far too long. I think everybody involved would recognize that or should recognize that. I think it's high time, and I think it's a model for or perhaps a high profile example for others to follow where they haven't already done that. We did it in 2016. We made sure that if you were a world champion in weightlifting, I'm just using the high level example, as a man or a woman, you earn the same. Now, our women earn much more as a percentage of our funds at USA Weightlifting because our women's team is, quite frankly, deeper and more successful, as is the US soccer women's national team. And therefore, they should earn more than the men's national team. There's a lot of money in soccer, and that's a challenge because of the way that FIFA, the International Federation, remunerates and forces national federations to remunerate men's teams. That's part of this. It hasn't been discussed a lot, which is a challenge. It's not one that is unovercomable. And clearly, US soccer have found a way. So, I think congratulations to US soccer. I think it shouldn't take athletes having to take legal action. It shouldn't take athletes having to take public action, but sometimes that action is necessary. And ultimately, the Olympic movement, the Paralympic movement, and sport should be about athletes first and foremost. So you got to see that equity in pay, in treatment and conditions, because that was part of this case too. We've seen the NCAA with the weight rooms at the 2 basketball events, which was not something that I enjoyed seeing. But and okay, fine. We don't want to drag up old issues for that, but it's a good example of where you can't have separate conditions. And it should be all, by the way, the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup, not the World Cup and the Women's World Cup. I don't call it weightlifting and women's weightlifting.
Yeah. Well, Phil, I appreciate you for addressing that question again. We, with more D&I conversations, we just want to have real one-on-one discussions. And so thank you so much for what you do as the Chief Executive Officer of USA Weightlifting. To all of those who are out there viewing today's podcast, let's support USA Weightlifting. Let's support the coaches. Let's support the clubs that really promote this sport. You have a board here at USA Weightlifting, a CEO, and a team. I've personally had the pleasure of working with them that are really committed to ensuring representation in diverse communities, promoting equity and promoting inclusion. And Phil is right there at the forefront leading those efforts. So Phil, thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you for what you do for your sport and for the discipline of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any parting shots you want to give our viewers before we end this meeting?
No, just, if you're listening to this, you're probably somebody that I don't need to say this to, but when you're putting in diversity, equity, inclusion programs, you're going to face opposition. They're going to be loud opponents. The people you are benefiting most will likely be quiet. They may not even be known to you. And it's worth bearing that in mind as you go forward in this process. And find yourself a Susie Sanchez. Those are my 2 pieces of advice.
There you go. Well, Phil, thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in to more DEI conversations. You can like this podcast. You can also visit my website at www.marlonmoore.com, or you can meet me where I'm at. You can send me an email directly at marlon@marlonmoore.com. Phil, thank you so much. Continue the great work, and I look forward to seeing you and speaking with you soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Right. Thanks, my friend. Bye-bye.
Cheers.